The alien princess hired a human bodyguard. The assassins never came back. The first one came through the ventilation shaft at 3:40 in the morning, and he was good. Quiet, controlled. He moved like someone who had done this many times before and expected tonight to be no different. He was wrong about that. Marcus Cole had been sitting in the dark for 6 hours with a cup of cold coffee, a protein bar he had not touched, and a very clear picture in his head of exactly which shaft they were going to use. He had mapped this station 2 days ago. Every corridor, every locked gate, every place where the lighting had a dead angle, every access point that a trained operative would look at and think, yes, this is where I go in. Marcus had looked at that shaft and thought the same thing, so he waited there. When the cutter dropped silently from the ceiling grate, Marcus was already behind him. It lasted 4 seconds. The man hit the floor without making a sound. Marcus zip-tied his wrists to the pipe on the wall, took his communicator, and went back to his coffee. He had 3 more to deal with before sunrise. 2 weeks earlier, the galaxy had not been this complicated. Marcus Cole was sitting in the Concordat Labor Exchange on the station called Veyrun's Crossing, filling out his availability form for the 3rd time in a month. He was 38 years old, an inch under 6 feet, and had the kind of face that made people on the street not quite make eye contact. Not threatening exactly, just a face that suggested the person behind it had seen things and filed them away carefully, and was always, quietly, thinking. His service record was 1 page long if you only counted the commendations. It got much longer if you counted everything else. The commendation was for pulling 4 Concordat peacekeepers out of a collapsed building on Theros Station under fire. The reprimand was for what happened to the people who had caused the collapse. The note at the bottom of his file, left by Ambassador Varel of the Villari diplomatic mission, read, "Do not hire this creature near anything you value." Marcus had read it once, found it fair under the circumstances, and moved on. The Chamberlain found him on a Tuesday. He was a small, nervous Sothari male named Piran, with pale green skin and the kind of posture that suggested he spent most of his life apologizing in advance for things that had not happened yet. He sat across from Marcus in the exchange waiting area and placed a datapad on the table between them. "Her Serene Radiance, Ixara Vel Sothari, requires close protection," Piran said. "The assignment begins immediately. The contract runs through the Meridian Summit, 14 days from now. The rate is triple your listed fee, with a hazard supplement." Marcus did not look at the datapad. "How many are coming?" Piran blinked 4 times. His species blinked when they were startled. "I beg your pardon?" "Not if," Marcus said. "How many? Because if you were just worried about general security, you would have hired a Concordat team. You came to me specifically, which means the threat is specific, which means someone has already decided she needs to not reach the summit. So I want to know how many they are likely to send." Piran's skin shifted slightly toward gray. "We believe 4 Dravani contractors." "Good," Marcus said, and picked up the datapad. "I'll take it." He made 1 call before boarding the transit shuttle. His younger sister, Nell, who lived in their mother's house back on Earth and ran a small bakery, and asked him almost never about his work, because she understood him well enough to know he would always go back to it. He gave her his account routing number, said it was just in case she ever needed it, said he would call from the Meridian when it was done. She did not cry. She was his sister. She said, "Come home after," and hung up. He thought about that the whole shuttle ride. The Gilded Meridian was the kind of place that existed because some species needed to believe that beauty and safety could occupy the same space. It was a transit station that had been built to look like a palace. Gold panels on every wall, lighting that never flickered, corridors wide enough for 3 large species walking side by side. It sat in stable orbit above a gas giant the color of a bruise, and it hummed with the kind of quiet that only large amounts of money could buy. Marcus spent his first 6 hours there not meeting the princess. Piran had introduced them in the main reception chamber, and it had lasted approximately 90 seconds. Ixara Vel Sothari was 8 feet tall, blue-black in skin tone, with bioluminescent patterns across her shoulders and jaw that flickered when she spoke. She was the 3rd daughter of the Sothari matriarch, and she had, 2 months ago, publicly voted against her own mother's trade agreement with the Dravani Syndicate. She had done it on record. She had done it knowing what it would cost her. She looked at Marcus the way someone looks at a piece of furniture they have been told is expensive, and cannot figure out why. "You are very small," she said. "Most things that are dangerous are," Marcus said, and asked Piran for a station maintenance map. He spent those 6 hours the only way he knew how to start a job. He walked everything. He timed the security patrol rotations. He identified the 3 cargo loading bays that had irregular staff access. He found the ventilation infrastructure, which ran through the station like a second skeleton, and he walked as much of it as he could fit through, marking every junction on a physical map he drew himself on paper he had brought from Earth, because paper did not need charging, and did not connect to networks, and did not get remotely wiped. He found the shaft that bothered him most. Bay 7 access, lower level. It ran directly to the service corridor behind the guest quarters. Someone had recently oiled the hinge on the interior grate. He left it unsealed. He did not touch the hinge. Then he wrote a report. 8 pages. Annotated diagrams. He gave it to Piran at midnight and went to sleep for 4 hours. Ixara read the report at 2 in the morning. He found out later from Piran, who mentioned it with a careful, neutral expression, that Marcus had learned to recognize as an alien, trying very hard not to say that something had surprised them. She began talking to him on the second day. It started as questions about the station, his assessment of certain corridors, whether he thought her official Concordat escort, a well-meaning young officer named Garrett Fenn, was a liability. Marcus told her Garrett was not a liability, but was also not trained for this specific situation, and had quietly given Garrett a copy of the field medicine guide from his kit, with the relevant pages tabbed, and told him to read it that night. Garrett had asked why. Marcus had said, "You probably won't need it. Read it anyway." The questions changed on the third day. She asked him, in the quiet of the corridor outside her chambers, why he did this work. He thought about it. "It's what I'm built for," he said. "That seems like a sad reason," she said. "I think it's honest," he said. "Most people do things because they want to be seen doing them. I do this because I am good at it, and it matters. That doesn't feel sad to me." She watched him for a moment, her bioluminescence shifting through a color he could not name. Then she pulled out a small handheld screen and played him a recording. It was her testimony. The day she voted against the compact. She stood in the Concordat chamber, and she spoke in a clear, calm voice about why the agreement was built on compromises that would harm smaller systems. Why the short-term economic gains were not worth the structural damage to Concordat trade law. Why she was choosing to vote against her own family's position, and why she was not sorry. She had known, she said in the recording, that she would lose allies. She said it without anger, without drama. Just a woman stating a fact she had already processed and accepted. Marcus watched it twice. She asked him what he thought. "I think that took more courage than most things I've done," he said. "I've been shot at. That's a body problem. What you did is different. That costs in ways that don't heal the same way." She was quiet for a moment. The light along her jaw shifted to a color that was deep and slow. He did not know what it meant at the time. "My people have a phrase," she said. "It means, 'I see you clearly now.' We use it rarely." "What does it mean exactly?" "It means that before this moment, I was looking at a surface. Now I am looking at what is actually there." Marcus nodded. He thought he understood. He went back to watching the corridor. The scout appeared on day 3. Marcus had been expecting someone to do a walk of the station, and the Dravani contractor doing it was professional enough that most security teams would have missed him. He moved like a maintenance worker. He did not look at the cameras. He paused at the right places and moved on. Marcus identified him by one thing. The contractor paused at ventilation access points for approximately 2 seconds longer than a real maintenance worker would. Not long enough to draw attention from anyone who was not specifically watching for it. Long enough for Marcus. He did not move on the scout. He let him finish his walk. He wanted the team's leadership to feel confident. He wanted them to believe the shaft was the right entry point, that the timing was right, that the human bodyguard was manageable. He went back to his room that night and slept for 3 hours and felt fine. Dihara, which was the name Marcus had given Garrett in his head, because Garrett had mentioned once that his grandmother had a Sothari name she preferred, spent those days following Marcus at a respectful distance and asking increasingly good questions. By day 4, he had stopped asking about protocol and started asking about sightlines. Marcus counted this as progress. The hit came on night 4, 3:42 in the morning. Marcus had not slept. He had been awake for 22 hours, sitting in the corridor junction with his back to the wall, drinking cold coffee and reading a cargo manifest for the 4th time, because something in the shipping dates had bothered him from the beginning, and he had finally figured out what it was. The Dravani contractor running this operation had come in on a resupply vessel 3 days before anyone should have known the Princess's routing had been confirmed, which meant the leak was inside the Concordat scheduling office, which was information Marcus filed away for the post-mission report. He heard them before the motion sensor registered anything. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of the right sounds. The ventilation system had a rhythm. He had listened to it for 4 days. He knew when it shifted. He was at the corridor junction below the shaft before the grate was open. The first one dropped into the corridor, and Marcus took him apart in 4 seconds. No noise, no light. The man was trained, and it still did not matter, because Marcus had been waiting for exactly this, and training without context is not the same as training with it. He left the first one zip-tied and moved. The second came from the East Service Access and was carrying a sonic disruptor, which was a weapon that cost approximately 40,000 Concordat credits and could shatter the internal structures of most biological targets within 6 meters. Marcus had foam earplugs in his ears. He had put them in 4 hours ago. They had cost him the equivalent of 2 Earth dollars at a supply kiosk, and they were enough, combined with the fact that he was already moving and the disruptor had a 2-second charge cycle, to close the distance before the weapon fired. He took the weapon. He used it on its owner at a setting low enough to not cause permanent damage. He zip-tied this one to a support strut. The third was fast, faster than the first 2, faster than Marcus expected from the dossier he had built in his head. This one had clearly been held back for exactly this contingency, released only after the first 2 were taken, using them as a diagnostic. The third one hit Marcus in the left side with a strike that he felt as a bloom of heat and immediate structural complaint from 3 ribs. He processed it, filed it, kept moving. Pain is information. He had learned that at 22, in training so difficult that a quarter of the class did not finish. Pain said, that area is compromised. He adjusted his mechanics, removed the variables that the injury introduced, continued. 11 seconds of direct engagement. He did not win cleanly. He won. The 4th was at Ixara's door. Marcus was faster. He did not remember crossing the corridor exactly. He remembered the math of angles and the calculation of who would arrive first, and the conclusion that he would, and then he was between the 4th contractor and the door, and the contractor looked at him with an expression that Marcus had seen before on the faces of people who had suddenly understood something they had underestimated. The 4th one did not fight after that. He made the correct decision. Marcus put him on the floor anyway, carefully, without more damage than necessary. He stood up and knocked on Ixara's door with his left hand, because his right was not cooperating as well as usual. She opened it. She was completely unharmed. She was also glowing in a way that Marcus had not seen from her before, a full-body light that pulsed outward from her chest and moved in slow waves. He did not know what it meant. He thought it might be adrenaline. He thought he might ask Piran later. Behind him, Garrett appeared from the connecting corridor, with the field medicine guide open in one hand, and a look on his face that was 1 part relief, 1 part something approaching professional respect, and 1 part pure and unfiltered alarm. The notes say to start with ribs, Garrett said. Page 40, Marcus said. Yeah. Are those all of them? Yes, Marcus said. Are you sure? Yes, Marcus said. I'm sure. Garrett spent the next 18 minutes doing a very competent job of field medicine for someone who had never practiced it outside a classroom. Marcus told him so. Garrett said, I read the guide 4 times. Marcus said, that's why. Ixara stood in the doorway and did not speak. The light from her skin was still moving. It was slower now, quieter, like a tide going out. Later, Piran told Marcus that the full-body pulse light in Sothari physiology was involuntary. It could not be faked or controlled. It happened in moments of extreme relief, It happened when something you had believed was lost turned out not to be. He told Marcus this in a clinical tone, not looking directly at him, in the way that someone tells you a piece of information they think you deserve to have. Marcus nodded and said nothing. 2,000 light hours away, in a monitoring room on a rented Concordat courier vessel, a man named Dorian Vec sat in front of 4 blank screens and looked at the last transmission data from his team. He had run contracts for 21 years. He had worked against Concordat security details, private military firms, palace guards, and 2 separate groups of former intelligence operatives. He had a success rate that people in his industry spoke of quietly and with a kind of reverence. He watched the timestamps. First operative, down at 3:42 and 12 seconds. Second, 3:42 and 16. Third, 3:42 and 27. Fourth, 3:42 and 51. 18 minutes and 39 seconds from entry to resolution. 4 operatives, 1 human. The human had taken a structural hit in the middle of it and continued without apparent reduction in effectiveness. Dorian Vec sat with that for a long time. Then he sent a message to his employer, citing operational failure and full contract dissolution, returned the advance payment with a note that read, simply, "I do not repeat mistakes," and filed the termination paperwork. He booked passage to the Outer Rim 3 days later. He had always thought about farming. He thought about it now, with a new and very serious level of commitment. Marcus found out about this 6 weeks later, through a Concordat intelligence contact who owed him a favor. He read the report in the transit lounge on Veyron's Crossing and finished his coffee, and did not feel anything in particular, except a kind of professional recognition of one person's ability to correctly read a situation and act accordingly. He respected that. On the morning after the engagement, Piran delivered the hazard supplement payment to Marcus's account. Marcus returned it within the hour. Piran came to him directly, visibly confused in the way that only a Sothari administrative professional could be, which was the kind of confusion that looked like a person doing a calculation that kept returning an impossible answer. "The supplement was agreed to in the contract," Piran said. "I quoted for this job," Marcus said. "All of it. The quote held. The contract allows for the supplement to be paid in addition to the base fee." "I know what the contract allows," Marcus said. "I'm telling you I don't want it." "What do you want?" Marcus had thought about this already. "I want to hear the rest of the recording," he said. "The testimony." She cut it off before the end. Piran stared at him. "The last 10 minutes," Marcus said. "Whatever she said after the vote was entered, that part." Piran's skin shifted through several colors. He went away and came back in 20 minutes, and nodded once. Ixara played him the rest of the recording that afternoon, in the main observation deck of the Gilded Meridian, with the gas giant filling the window behind her, in bruised purple and slow amber. The end of the testimony was quieter than the beginning. She talked about what she believed government was supposed to protect. She talked about the systems that fell apart slowly, because the people who could have stopped it decided the cost was too high. She talked without performing anything for anyone. When it was done, Marcus did not say anything for a while. He was thinking about a specific kind of person. The kind that does the right thing, not because it is safe, but because they have decided that safety is not the measurement they are using. "Thank you," he said. "You returned the supplement," she said. "The job was the job. Most people would have taken it. Most people take a lot of things they have not earned," he said. "I try to be specific." She was quiet. The light across her shoulders did something slow and warm that he did not have a word for. "Piran tells me the summit continues for another 9 days," she said. "Yes," Marcus said. "Will you stay for the remainder?" He looked at the gas giant for a moment. He thought about Nell and her bakery, and the call he still needed to make. He thought about the 4 men zip-tied in a corridor, who had woken up to Concordat security, and a future full of very serious legal questions. He thought about Garrett Fenn, who had messaged him that morning, asking if there were other field medicine resources he should be reading. He thought about the kind of courage that does not have adrenaline behind it. "Yes," Marcus said. He called Nell that evening. She answered on the second ring. She said, "Done already?" And he said, "Mostly." And she said, "Come home after." And he said he would. He went back to the corridor. He stood where he was supposed to stand. He was good at this. It mattered. That was enough.